So if you don't want to be seen, this would just only be distributed in a sense for the people that were not able to make it. So we'll start this session. Today is Thursday, April 13th. I would like to start by first saying to honor the Squamish, Tallahassee, and Musqueam nations for the lands that we're on for learning, education, and playing on this beautiful territory that we are on. Before I start, my name is Christina Nikitas. I am the coordinator for the in-training program. I have my colleague here, Jeanette Shearer, who's the communications manager for SportMedBC. We would like to thank everybody for coming today for Michaela Khan's um, presentation on knees and running and what are the remedies to help. A little bit about Michaela. She holds a BA and MSCN in kinesiology from Western University. She basically studies all things running biomechanics. Thus far, she has her work has been featured in award-winning journalism in the New York Times, Washington Post, Toronto Stars, the Canada Running Magazine, as well on radio and podcasts. And we're very happy to have her here giving an educational content towards you as 10K runners of what is the whole aspect in the biomechanics of running and how to further your remedies towards keeping a healthy lifestyle. So she does a lot of volunteering and at local races and coaches running programs, and she is one of our clinic leaders at Lee Physique. So I would like to give a warm welcome to Michaela. And Michaela, this is your floor. So before I like to start, any questions you have for Michaela, please, we'll have a Q&A at the end. So in the chat on the bottom right-hand side, there's at the middle button, there's a chat. Just click on that, type anything in. Jeanette and I are going to monitor it, and then at the end, we'll answer some of the questions that you have for her. So like I said, thank you, Michaela, for being here, and the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thanks, Christina. And thanks, Jeanette. And thanks, SportMedBC, for having me. It's nice to see you all this Thursday evening. We've got some familiar faces, and I hope to get to know more of you. So I'll be talking about, does running ruin or remedy our knees? And I'm also just going to start with a land acknowledgement. I'm coming to you from UBC today, so I'd like to acknowledge that I'm presenting on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. And I'd also like to take this chance to tell you about a recent movie that I saw, and it highlights the power of running. So Run, Woman, Run is a Canadian film about a single Indigenous mother who commits to running a marathon. And through this process, she sees the ghost of Tom Longboat, who coaches her in both running and staying connected with her heritage. And Tom Longboat is, of course, the first Indigenous person to win the Boston Marathon. It is a gorgeous and heart-wrenching movie, and it's well worth a watch. And through this presentation, try and remember that running can connect us all. So no matter what race, age, gender, sexuality, etc., that you may be. So first, I'll start by telling you a little bit about myself. So my interest in running started pretty early. This was my first kiddie race when I was 2 out at UBC. And through my childhood in sports, I became interested in biomechanics, or studying the forces upon or within our body. And this led me to do a BA and MSc in kinesiology at Western before starting my PhD at UBC in rehabilitation sciences. I still run recreationally. This is a picture of me last year at the same race as the first picture 25 years later. And lifelong activity has been modeled to me by my parents. So this is me running with my dad in Ontario, where I grew up, a year after I moved to BC. So clearly I'd forgotten what a Canadian winter looked like, and I was very, very, very cold. I think I managed to run about 2K outside. Wasn't much, but I did it. I'm involved in some high performance sport research. So this is me at the World Athletic Championships last year in Oregon. And I love engaging with the community. So I'm really psyched to be a run leader with SportMedBC at the Le Physique location on Monday nights. So a question for you to think about, and you can keep your answer in your head, but do you think running is bad for your knees? So remember your answer, and we'll see if it changes by the end. So my goals for today, we're going to do a quick anatomy overview. We're going to talk about osteoarthritis. Then we'll talk about running and how it affects our joints. And then I'll tell you about some ongoing research we have in our lab. And a quick disclaimer, I work with medical professionals, but I am not one myself. So while I'm presenting you with the latest research, I cannot legally give you medical advice. So onwards to the science. So we have a pretty diverse crowd here today, so I'm going to take a minute to go over some basic anatomy. So imagine your knee joint, or look down and see it for yourself. So up there we have your thigh bone, and down there your shin bone. And when two bones join together, we get a joint. And within a joint, you have your cartilage, and it's like a smooth connective tissue that sits on the ends of your bone and allows them to glide over each other. And this movement is helped by synovial fluid, which is a thick, nutrient-dense substance that lubricates our joints. And everything is contained by a capsule, which basically stops the fluid from leaking everywhere. So just to recap, you have your thigh bone up top, then your shin bone, cartilage on the ends of your bones, synovial fluid bathing the joint, and then the capsule all around it holding it in. I want to take a closer look at the cartilage because it's a bit of a strange tissue in our body. So it doesn't have a blood supply, which is usually how our tissues get fed. And instead, cartilage is 65 to 80% water. And this water can move in and out of the cartilage. And I'm going to represent cartilage as a sponge. And you may be thinking, why a sponge, Michaela? But it's very purposeful. Because when force is applied to cartilage, or this sponge that's filled with water, so if you can imagine if you're running or walking or moving your joints, this water rushes out of the cartilage. So it kind of flattens like a sponge. But when you remove that load, the water comes back in, and in your body, it actually brings in some of the synovial fluid that we just talked about. So again, it's that rich, dense, nutrient-dense fluid. So the water and synovial fluid comes right back into it. So that's how cartilage actually gets fed. So the take home here is that you need that joint loading, that compression and relaxation of the sponge or cartilage in your body to feed the cartilage and keep it healthy. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit to osteoarthritis. So what exactly is osteoarthritis, or OA? It's a progressive disease of our joints that represents the failed repair of joint damage. And unfortunately, there's no cure, and it may progress with abnormal impacts in your joint. It is a whole joint disease. So the hallmark signs are bone spurs, so your bones get a little bit knobbly on the ends of where the joint is. Your cartilage gets a little bit thinner. And because cartilage is thinner, the bones move a little bit closer together. We call that joint space narrowing. But before I go on, I just want to make it very clear that there's a difference between structural OA and symptomatic OA. So just because there's changes to the structure of your joint and your anatomy, like you're seeing on the screen, doesn't mean that you'll have symptoms alongside of it. So structural OA is just these changes that you see, but symptomatic OA is the changes to your anatomy plus the symptoms. And structural OA is very common. So if you're over 40, about 50% of you will have these changes if you take an X-ray. And it's really a normal part of aging. So just like wrinkles on your skin, just like wrinkles in your joint. So very, very normal. So that's structural OA, the picture I just shown. If you do have symptomatic OA, you might experience pain, stiffness, swelling, and some movement limitations. So you might have some difficulties climbing stairs, crouching, kneeling, or squatting. Now, if you do have OA, exercise is the best first-line treatment we have. And these exercise programs have been studied a lot in OA. They might include like strength programs, aerobic training, like walking or any movement that gets your heart rate up, or something we call neuromuscular training, so like balance practice or Tai Chi. And any of these activities, alone or in combination of others, have been found to be as effective or more effective than pain medication for the treatment of OA symptoms. And pain medication, we're talking about, if you've ever heard of NSAIDs, so non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, and even opioids as well, so quite strong. So you'll notice that I mentioned aerobic exercise, but I didn't mention running. So let's talk about why. So all in all, I think we all know that running is pretty good for us. It provides an opportunity to get together socially in our communities. It maintains muscle strength. It controls your weight. It helps your cardiovascular health. So lots and lots of good things about running. But despite all these benefits, I'm sure we've all heard at one point that running wrecks our knees. And running gets a particularly bad rep because of the higher impact forces experienced by the body compared to other activities like walking. And it was once thought that these higher impact activities would lead to OA. And this idea comes from really old studies in about the 1970s that took cartilage from an animal, they hooked it up to this rig and essentially hit it over and over and over again. And they found that when they compressed it repeatedly, it got damaged. And the higher load they used, the higher they impact it, the worse the damage was. But the thing is that these animal studies aren't representative of what happens in humans. So it looks scary, but not what actually happens. So for one, the cartilage in your body is living. It recovers slowly, but it is able to adapt. And these experiments that compress the cartilage so many times and with such great forces, again, they don't happen in the body. So not the best experiments to base this wear and tear theory. And I'll just share with you a few of the research studies. So they've looked at the relationship between running and OA. So one study followed people for 18 years and found no association between running and developing OA. Another study found that if you're a runner, you have a reduced risk of having a joint replacement surgery. And finally, during the pandemic, our lab wrote a paper that combined the results of a bunch of studies which looked at cartilage before and after running, and there were no long-lasting changes. Another question for you to think about. So this one study looked at over 100,000 people and categorized them into either competitive runners, non-runners, or recreational runners. And by competitive runners, I mean they're competing on the international stage, so very, very high caliber. Which group do you think had the lowest incidence of OA? I'll give you a second to think about it. So competitive runners, non-runners, and recreational. It was the recreational runners. So competitive runners and non-runners had similar rates, so about 13 and 10% of the population. But if you ran recreationally, only 3.5% of them had OA. So that makes us think, does recreational running have a protective effect on our joints? And we call this the Goldilocks principle of healthy cartilage loading. So too little load, and we might not be able to stimulate that water movement in and out of our cartilage to feed it and make it strong. Too much loading, like an Olympic level athlete that's not they're running for performance, not for lifelong activity. Maybe that's a little bit too much for our body to tolerate, but there seems to be a portion just in the middle that's just right that our body can adapt to. But it's really important that I mentioned that all the research I just mentioned, it's on people with healthy joints with no signs of OA. So that made me ask the question, what happens to your joints if you already have OA? And that's where our PhD or my PhD research comes in. And you may be thinking, Michaela, do people with knee OA even run? Well, 1 in 7 Canadian adults have OA. And the answer is yes, absolutely, they do run. And some can run extremely well, even with severe OA. But as I mentioned, we don't know if it's safe yet. Does running accelerate knee OA, or will it have the same protective effect as it does with healthy joints? So we were lucky enough to get funding from the Canadian government for a study called ORCA, or Osteoarthritis Running Cartilage Assessment. And it's a 12-week study, and you'll visit us 4 times in the lab. So the first visit is to do a biomechanics assessment or to evaluate your running technique. Next, we'll take pictures of your knees using an MRI before and after a 30-minute treadmill run. Then we'll send you away for a completely personalized 12-week running program, and it's aimed to increase your mileage by about 5 to 10% a week. And then we bring you back to repeat the biomechanics assessment and the MRI at the end of your 12-week program. So for a little inside look, this is what we do for our biomechanics assessment. So we have motion capture technology, just like they do in the movies for like green screen kind of stuff. And we have a special treadmill that we can measure the forces that you're putting into the ground and then that the ground is pushing back into you. And so we'll use those little silver reflective stickers and we'll put them all over your body. And essentially we're going to create a model of yourself. So this is one of our participants and this is what it will look like. So we get a nice skeleton figure and we can estimate the forces in your body. And so that's the biomechanics. For the MRI session, we'll compare your cartilage before and after running. And we get these really pretty pictures like on the bottom. So we'll look at how thick your cartilage is. And we actually have very, very special advanced techniques at UBC that we can even see what's inside of your cartilage. So we're still recruiting for the study and we're looking for people with and without OA. You have to be running at least 10 kilometers per week and have no history of knee surgery or knee injury or any injections in the last 6 months. And as I said, 2 groups of people, so people with OA that have pain and those changes on X-ray, so changes to your anatomy. And then our control participants or people without knee OA, and you have to have no pain and no changes on your X-rays either. So to wrap it all up, is running bad for your knees? You can tell your friends and family, no. Will I develop running? Oh, sorry, will I develop running? Will I develop osteoarthritis from running? Probably not. Will running progress my osteoarthritis? We're not sure yet, but since running is so good for you, stopping running might actually cause more harm. And as always, the best exercise is the one that you enjoy the most, and I won't judge you if it's not running. So just to end up, that's all I have for you today. So thank you again to SportMedBC for having me and for all of you for spending your Thursday evening with me. Just on the bottom there, I have the details for the study I mentioned. So please feel free to email or call, and that's our lab website just on the bottom. And if you're on Twitter, I also have Twitter and I tweet semi-regularly, but I'm happy to take any questions. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Michaela. Appreciate that. That was a lot of cool information and details that you brought to us. That it's pretty cool to see what type of technology and the advancement of sports science is getting into and what you're looking into. So feel free to everybody that's on the floor, there's a reaction button on the lower right hand side. You can raise your hand on that or put it in the chat, but this is more open. So I will start off with one of the questions. Michaela, you were mentioning a lot of movement, the light body weight, like the Tai Chi, the momentum. Do you think more of an enhancement to maintain that is light movement, just moving up and down constantly, than always lifting weights, putting pressure? Because a lot of people sometimes think if you're lifting weights, you're keeping it mobility, you're keeping that structure in line to strengthen it. But do you feel that the fact if you're doing like light body weight workouts, that sort of will keep the same maintained but not having a longer effect? Does that make sort of sense?
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm not sure about the longer effects. I know for cartilage health, you will have to have some sort of impact through the joint. So to get that compression in and out, and like the most efficient way is to like walk or run. But I would say the other forms of exercise without impact are still good, because we say that motion is flotion, because remember talking about that synovial fluid. So essentially, you just want to keep it moving. And you can do that through just moving your joints as well, just to get it moving within the capsule. Otherwise, that fluid gets stagnant, and that's when your joints become really stiff. So although it may hurt to start moving, and we see that with a lot of people with arthritis, that there's a little hump where their pain might increase just a little bit when they're starting, but usually we see it come down when they really get going.
Do you find that when they hit that peak of when it gets stuck, is it just because they're not using that range of motion mostly likely? It's just like I don't want to say that they're pushing themselves to that full capacity, but it's like they're not using what our body's meant to, that whole motion. So it gets to a point where it's like, okay, we're gonna take it back a notch. Because correct me if I'm wrong, by the age of 35, your muscles start to sit by itself. That's when it stops growing in a sense. So by the age of 35, it's sort of contracted to what you already have.
Yeah. Sorry, I had something to say, but it's escaped me. So yeah, the movement. Sorry, can you repeat what you said at the beginning?
Oh, just like how the range of motion, like sometimes
Oh,
people
yes.
don't use the full range. They get like, some people stop here and it's like, no, keep on like when you're doing warm-ups and cool downs, it's like, oh, a little bit, but it's like once you do the full, like that arthritis where that buildup is it just because a lot of people are not extending their aspect of their body range?
Yeah, and getting that fluid movement. That is part of it. And really, it's anything that you start doing that's new, you have to allow your body to adapt to it. And that's actually something I really like about the SportMed BC like run walk programs, because I would never take somebody with arthritis or without and say, okay, go run 5K. I always start them gradually with like a run walk program. And interestingly, cartilage responds better to more frequent runs, but of less distance. So with my new runners, I'll get them to do a little bit every day. And even if that's just like running for 30 seconds, walking for 2 minutes, and building up from there, if you can do, that 5 times a week, I'd rather that than going out for like a 10K run on Monday and calling it a day. So start slowly. Your body's meant to move, but give it time.
No, fair enough. Jeanette, do we have anybody in the questions in the portals in the chat?
Yeah, we've got one question here. It says, how do these studies define a recreational runner? Is it so many hours or is it kilometers per week?
Great question. It differs on every study, but I would say it's anything less than like a carded athlete on an international stage. So if it's not your job, you are a recreational runner, is how the studies are defining it.
Mhm.
I know
Nice.
there's
Fair
some
enough.
pretty serious recreational runners out there. But it is truly amazing what your body can adapt to. One of the studies that was included in our paper, it was on athletes that ran from the bottom of Italy to the top of Norway. And they essentially had a mobile MRI machine and scanned them 4 times in that during that race. So at the beginning, sort of third the way through, and then at the end. And they found that there were no lasting changes to the knee, the foot, or the ankle cartilage. So obviously these are very, very well adapted athletes, and you can't just wake up one day and say, hey, I'm going to run from Italy to Norway. Please don't do that. But it just shows that our bodies can tolerate a lot.
That's what I was gonna say, how you were just a lot of our bodies tolerate. How do we know, like you in your presentation sort of outlines of like what is not like really a healthy joint or what to look for? I wouldn't say how would people assess, but what's like one things that they would start to know of being like, okay, when should I go and get checked in, or how should I incorporate some things a little bit better?
Yeah, so for if you're worried about OA, so if you have symptoms like maybe morning stiffness or just stiff joints in general, or kind of hot knees or hot joints, normally a doctor can diagnose you with just a history, so based on symptoms. If I wouldn't recommend MRI, MRI won't show anything more than an X-ray would for diagnosing osteoarthritis. But in terms of pain, what signs we're looking for is, do you have pain during the run an hour later, and when you wake up in the morning. And if all three of those are yes, you might have pushed it just a little bit too far. So watch out for those signs. But otherwise, yeah, you're pretty much good to go.
Thank you.
We have another question here. Are there any basic exercises or treatments that we can do to prevent knee stiffness, pain post running? I do have one knee that tightens, but movement helps it.
Keep it moving. I would definitely recommend going to see your physiotherapist. Some people love stretching after. Stretching is interesting. It hasn't been proven to prevent injuries if you do it before or after. So if you have time and it's something you enjoy, by all means do it. If you don't do it, that's okay as well. But if you found that the motion helps, yeah, I'd recommend that. If you're having a swelling episode, keep the range moving. And then when you get home, if you lie down and put your knee above your heart. So I like to lie down on my bed and just put my legs on my bed, like headboard thing, and read a book, or let's be honest, I'm on TikTok on my phone. Yeah, just keep it elevated and then compressed as well. So we used to hear about like police or rice, like rest, ice, elevation. The new thing is peace and love, and you can Google that. And yeah, I can't remember them all off by heart, but peace and love is what you need.
It's a very long acronym. I'm still trying to remember it now.
Yeah, it's super long, but they explained, like, I think peace is right after you get a flare up, and then love is like to protect it later on. So it's not just the immediate. That's why I like it.
Okay, one more question. Why does the joint feel hot with OA? What's happening in there to make that happen?
Your body's natural inflammatory processes. The heat thing, I'm actually not too sure. I'm not sure why it gets hot, but yeah, lots of debate on inflammation. We're actually being told now not to ice unless absolutely necessary, or use anti-inflammatories, because that stunts the healing process of your body. You actually need your body to adapt. But if it is burning hot, obviously, maybe a cold compress might help. That's a good question. I actually don't know the answer to that. I'll look that up. Thank you.
And now I have one question, simply because you mentioned at the beginning the Run Woman Run movie.
Yes.
So I actually know one of my good friends, her sister-in-law is actually the main actress in that. She's from Saskatchewan. Yes.
Oh my gosh, that's so cool. Yeah, it was a great movie. Tell her.
So my question is, where did you see it?
Hey,
because I haven't seen it yet, but where?
I watched it on the plane, and I was bowling on the plane just by myself.
I've heard it's absolutely spectacular, but yeah. I'm like, I haven't been able to find it aside from, I know they had a few like viewings at different theaters. So I was wondering if you could find it like streaming wise.
Oh, that's a good, I have actually no idea. I've been recommending this movie to everybody, and I have no idea how to watch it.
It's on Crave subscription. You can watch it on YouTube. It's $4.99, Google Play, Apple TV, and Amazon Prime.
Thank you, Christina.
So yes, no, it's I also know people in the Indigenous community that was back and played a role in this too. So it's a great way to just also show not just like the story that everybody goes through with running, but the aspect of us Canadians that, you know, we're here and here to support and keep going. Like, it's awesome.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is a spectacular movie. So yeah, I'd recommend it. Thanks for that, Christina. And you might cry.
Perfect. It's a great everybody Friday night movie idea. There you go. There was one thing I just wanted to add. I know since you're an instructor, a clinic mentor for the groups, what you were mentioning, you know, like warm-ups. What are some warm-ups and ideas that you do at your clinic to get them going? Because there's a lot of difference from static and dynamic stretching. So what do you usually advocate that, you know, other people can take when they show up to their clinics next?
Yeah, good question. I know there's a few people from my clinics here, and we don't always do a warm-up, so I'm not going to lie to everyone. Usually when I do it personally, I start with just honestly the 5 minutes of walking. But with our osteoarthritis, with a lot of my patients, they often tell me that it takes them like sometimes a kilometer or two to really get going. So if you still feel stiff or warm or like things just aren't working out for you, that level of pain it's not the end of the world. So don't feel like you need to stop unless you're like more than a 5 out of 10 pain. But you don't have to be concerned if it's just starting to run. For warm-ups, yeah, just doing your walk, or there's something called ABCs. You can Google or YouTube those. But honestly, just get your body warm and moving. There's nothing in particular.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. I really love the facts that are coming out and all the research that you're doing. And, this is what we want to do at SportMedBC is bring your research here and educate everybody here. As well as you mentioned, to look for Kanice, you can go on sportmedbc.com. Under our directory, we have a list of practitioners across BC that would love to help you. Michaela, I know you are at Lee Physique, so there's also them as well if you're in that area. So, yeah, check out our resources, and I really thank everybody for being here today. Feel free to log off. This session is now over. Jeanette, you can, oh, Tina's got a question at the end, but Jeanette, you can end the session recording. Thank you.